Welcome to another episode of Design in Progress. Tonight we are back with Ned, a longtime tester player of things, and met up with Ned at Unpub.
Yeah, it was in March. It was at the end of March. Yeah.
And he actually gave a talk at Unpub. I will shorthand it as about just mathematics and game design. But I of course have it right here, the title screen, which is from hypergeometrics to hyperbolic time discounting mathematics for game design. And it was just a really, really interesting talk. And at some point it was supposed to go up on YouTube, and they never came back and talked.
They haven't gotten around to it.
They
I'm
never
sure
got
that
around
they
to
will
it.
at some point. Yeah.
And I was just like, well, my channel's all about sharing stuff and sharing resources, and sometimes that resource that we're going to share is people's brains. So without any further ado, I slide on, and I will pass it.
All right.
Cleared my throat and then turned off my microphone, as opposed to the other way around.
Hi, everybody. I'm Edward, or Ned Damon. It's one of those Robert Bob situations, but I go by Ned. And this is my talk about mathematics. I originally gave it at Unpub, and I'm giving it again because it was such a great hit that it needs an encore, obviously. So you may be asking who I am. I think that I got a very excellent introduction, but to go into a little bit more detail, I have a PhD in particle physics. Woo! I'm a data scientist for a health insurance company. I'm a mathematics enthusiast. At this point, you might be thinking of somebody cool like Matt Smith. Matt Smith is cool, right? Like I have a vague memory that I'm old now, so this is my kind of touchstones. But
he's the coolest. Let's be honest.
He's extremely the coolest. I'm the Break My Game event host in Portland, Oregon. So we run monthly playtesting here in Portland, Oregon. That's how I might kind of get my toe in the board game space. I'm also a podcaster. I do a podcast about the Star Wars Unlimited card game called The Force Unlimited, and I'm an amateur designer. I've got 3 games that I'm working on right now in various stages of being done. Rex Regnat, which is a trick-taking game about the Polish Constitution of 1791. Hench, which is a co-opetitive Saturday morning cartoon Minions. And Minneapolis, which is Dune Imperium in post-electric Minnesota. So, real hot topics, real engaging stuff. So why am I talking about mathematics and game design? Well, I'm going to start talking about the Romans, and you might say, "Oh gosh, the older gentleman is starting to talk about the Romans. Brace yourselves." But let's talk about aqueducts. The Romans built an enormous amount of really cool stuff. They built aqueducts, they built colosseums, they built these excellent roads, and they did it all without having a lot of what goes into kind of modern engineering. And the question is, how did they do it? Well, they had these forms. If you wanted to build an aqueduct, they had a recipe. This is exactly how you build an aqueduct. And you can see that the aqueduct is essentially just the same structure kind of repeated over and over, right? Like the aqueduct is just more of the same. If they had a recipe, and if you followed the recipe, you could get where you needed to get. And these recipes were developed over long periods of time through a lot of trial and error. And that's great. But if you wanted to do something new or something different, or you want to do something quickly without that kind of antecedent trial and error, then you really need mathematics, because mathematics is going to save you time. As a designer, you only have so many playtests that you get to run. People have only so much tolerance. You want to be sitting up in your lazy boy and enjoying the fruits of your thought. You don't want to have to be diving deep into the weeds and trying to run playtest after playtest after playtest. Playtesting is still important, but you can save yourself so many playtests that end up just being garbage if you do a little bit of math beforehand. And I'm here to talk to you about some mathematical techniques that you can use to make your life and your game designs better. So before we get too deep in, I have to give a caveat, because I always give caveats. And this is specifically about what mathematics is good for. Mathematics is good to answer specific questions precisely. And all the parts of that phrase are operative. The specific part means that you have to ask a specific question. Mathematics will give you that answer to that specific question. And the question needs to be well described and well posed. There are a lot of questions that are not well posed. An example of a not well posed question is, if I'm playing like a collectible card game, how many turn 1 plays should I include in my deck? I don't know, dude. Like there's a lot of answers to that question. How many is enough? I mean, you could include your whole deck as turn 1 plays. or you could include like a subset of your deck as turn one plays. And obviously, the true answer is somewhere in the middle. And so we have to answer a specific question precisely. And a specific question that we can answer is, if I want a greater than 95% chance of a player having a turn one play, how many should they have? Right? That's a specific question that we can answer precisely. And we can shorthand that back to that how many turn one plays should you include. But remember that the mathematics is just answering that second question. It's just answering the second question of I want a specific thing, and it's answering that specific thing. Cool. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is game trees. So this is kind of an economic / mathematical concept. It's a way that you can use to describe game states. So we have some initial states. A player might be presented with a set of options, and then another player might be presented with a different set of options. And then at the bottom, we have the payouts that are phrased in the form of payout, player one payout, player two payout. These options can be sequential or simultaneous. So if you think about it as sequential, we can have the first player chooses option one, and then the second player chooses option A. After player one chooses option one, then player two chooses option A, and you end up with the payout, player one gets A and player two gets B. If player one chose option two, and then player two chose option B, then you'd end up with GH rather. And we can also treat this as simultaneous. So let's talk about a game that we should all be familiar with, rock, paper, scissors. So if you start off with rock, paper, scissors, player one can throw rock, they can throw paper, they can throw scissors. And then simultaneously to player one throwing rock, then player two can throw rock, paper, or scissors. And we can get the game tree this way, and we can describe the results. If I throw rock and you throw rock, then it's a tie. If I throw rock and you throw paper, then I lose and you win. If I throw rock and you throw scissors, then I win and you lose. And you can go through all of this. Boy, I'm not going to lie. Putting together this slide took a huge amount of time. Drawing out these game trees is really laborious and it's really slow. There's got to be a better way. And that's where we're going to step into a little more advanced game theory. So we're going to move away from talking about game trees, and we're going to start talking about payoff matrices. So a payoff matrix is the exact same information that was contained in the game tree. It's just smaller and is faster to write and to interact with. So let's consider the payoff matrix for rock, paper, scissors. Player B has rock, paper, or scissors. Player A has rock, paper, or scissors. If player A throws rock and player B throws rock, then player A gets 0 and player B gets 0. If player A throws rock and player B throws paper, then player 1 loses and player 2 wins. Cool? Cool. So let's talk about a slightly more complex / interesting game. In this case, it's the stag hunt. The stag hunt is... People might be familiar with the prisoner's dilemma. I'm sick of talking about the prisoner's dilemma. Everybody talks about the prisoner's dilemma. We're going to talk about something more wholesome and cooperative. So the idea behind the stag hunt is that the kind of wrapping conceit for it is that you have two players. They are in the forest. They can work together to hunt a deer. And if they work together and hunt a deer, then they both get 10 points worth of venison. If one player tries to hunt the deer and the other player decides to go catch rabbits, then the player who went to catch rabbits, who defected, gets 8 points worth of rabbits worth of that. And the other player, all the rabbits have been caught, so they're only getting 3 points worth of berries or whatever they pick out. If you both decide to hunt rabbits, then the payout is 5-5, and that payout of 5-5 is that you both get some rabbits. You get, and you might be asking, geez, shouldn't this 8 be split into 4-4 rather than 5-5? And the answer is you can use declining marginal utility or some other kinds of math, hand wave. The precise values don't matter hyper much. It's just like the overall shape of this matrix. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is using those payoff matrices, you can do something really interesting. And this was talked about a little bit badly in the movie that you may have seen, the perhaps only movie about economics that people have ever seen, which is A Beautiful Mind, which is the Nash equilibria. So we're going to start off by defining a Nash equilibria. A Nash equilibrium is a state in which no player can gain by changing their own strategy. They're holding all other player strategies fixed. So let's look at this stag hunt. So when you say by changing your own strategy, that is, you are moving in a straight line. So I can change my strategy from cooperate to defect. You can change your strategy from cooperate to defect. Or if we're in defect, I can change my strategy to cooperate, or you can change your strategy to cooperate. We're looking for places in which no player can gain by unilaterally changing their strategy. And the answer is that there are two of them. There is one really obvious thing here. If we both cooperate, there is an equilibrium here, because if either of us chooses to defect, we go from getting 10 to getting 8. Unilaterally choosing to defect is a bad move. Similarly, there is another one secretly here under defect. If I am defecting and I choose to cooperate, I go from getting 5 to getting 3 outcome, 3 payoff. And so both of these states are equilibriums. And you might ask, how would we ever end up in this 5-5 state? That seems kind of ridiculous. And the answer is, if I don't think that I can trust you, then I should start off by throwing defect. Or maybe I'm not trying to get the maximum payout. I'm just trying to get more payout than you are. If we both cooperate, neither of us will ever get more payout than the other. The only time that I can get more than you is if I choose defect and you choose cooperate. And so as a result, there is going to be these two equilibrium strategies that will develop. Now let's consider rock, paper, scissors. Can you find Nash equilibriums in rock, paper, scissors? And the answer is there's not any. There's not any Nash equilibriums in rock, paper, scissors that are pure strategies. If I choose rock, then you ought to choose paper. But then if you choose paper, then I ought to choose scissors, and it just goes around and around and around. It turns out that there are Nash equilibrium and Nash equilibria that you can find that are generated by using a mixed strategy, where you are sort of randomly selecting whether you're going to choose rock, paper, or scissors. But that only holds if your opponent is also doing like a similar thing. If your opponent is following a strategy that is not a pure random strategy, then there is a strategy that you can choose that will dominate their strategy. And you get kind of really interesting things. And this is commonly why a lot of games feature rock, paper, scissors as a central dynamic, because there's not these Nash equilibria. The reason why we're talking about these Nash equilibria is because this is where player behavior is going to tend to fall. Once you end up in a Nash equilibria, there is no player decision, no individual player decision that is going to get you out of that Nash equilibrium. So if this is a dominant strategy and this is a dominant strategy, these strategies are these Nash equilibria where no player can play differently and get a better result, then you need to make sure that these strategies are interesting. So if you think about this as like an attack defend, you might want to make sure that both attack and defend are interesting outcomes, because that's likely where play is going to end up. So try and think whenever you're building your games and try and make sure that the Nash equilibria that are going to be emergent from your games are going to be interesting Nash equilibria, that those choices are interesting. And if they're not, figure out how to fix your payoff matrix so that you're not going to be ending up in boring game states. Cool. Next thing that we're going to talk about is combinatorics. This is a fancy way to say counting. So let's talk about the idea of n choose k. So let's say that we have n objects and we want to choose k objects out of the set of n. So there's a very useful function to remember that talks about the number of possible choices. This is the choose function. This is n choose k. This is the mathematician way to write it, is equal to n divided by k times n minus k. And I'm shouting there as a joke, but that exclamation point is the factorial function, which is equal, so n factorial is equal to n times n minus 1 times n minus 2, and so on down to 1. So for example, 4 factorial is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is in many cases 24. So let's pretend that I'm designing a game that has 5 colors in it, and a player builds their deck, let's say, with 2 colors. So you're using 5 choose 2, and if you plug that into the factorial function, you'll get 5 choose 2 is 5 factorial divided by 2 factorial times 3 factorial, which is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, divided by 2 times 1 divided by 3 times 2 times 1, which if you multiply it out is 120 divided by 12, which is 10. So there are 10 2-color pairs in a 5-color game. Cool. So what we're going to use this for is unlimited power, sort of. It's the way to measure the strength of coalition. It's called the Banzhaf Power Index. A group of n members has n factorial voting orders. Rather than the Banzhaf Power Index, we're going to talk about the Shapley-Shubik Power Index. It's a way to measure how strong somebody is within a coalition. So the number of times that a person M is a pivotal voter divided by the total number of voting orders is their power. So let's use an example, because that's a lot of really kind of abstract math. So let's consider that we have some kind of an interesting election. It's like a condo board election or like a shareholder election where different people have different number of votes. And you want to figure out whether or not a bill is going to pass or not. Well, A has 3 votes, B has 2 votes, and C and D both have 1 vote. And you need to get 4 votes, which is a simple majority, in order to pass a bill. So We write out all the possible voting orders, and I've highlighted the letter that corresponds to the person who is the pivotal voter, the voter who takes a no into a yes. And then I've circled the outcomes where A is the pivotal voter. So in this case, A is the pivotal voter in half of the possible voting orders. So A has a power of 0.5. And if you count, we're not going to do that right now because time is limited. But if you were to count, you would see that B, C, and D all have an equal number of times that they are the pivotal voter. So even though A has 3 power and B has 2 power, and C and D only have one. A has 3 votes, B has 2 votes, and C and D only have 1 vote. B has twice as many votes as C and D, but B has the exact same amount of power as C and D. In order to get over the hump, you either need C, B, D, or A and any one of those following. So you get very interesting power dynamics when you have these kinds of coalition problems. But haha, you fool, I tricked you. This isn't about coalitions at all. It's about victory points. So consider a game where you were trying to get to 4 victory points and you can get uniquely 3 victory points, 2 victory points, 1 victory point, or 1 victory point from various sources, each of which provides their resources only once, their victory points only once. If you need to get to 4 victory points, A is twice as good as or more than twice as good as B, even though it's only 1 point more. It's a Shapley-Shubik situation. A here is needed about half the ways to get across the finish line, whereas B, even though that B is 2 points, it's not worth any more than the 1 point. It's the same amount of ability to get you across the finish line. This is also about resources. If you imagine that you need like 7 space bucks to buy a starship and you only ever use space bucks for buying a starship, 2 space bucks is exactly as much as 1 space buck for the purpose of trying to buy your spaceship. And that's kind of the joy of mathematics, is that everything is secretly everything else except when it isn't. So we're going to take that combinatorics idea and we're going to move into another topic. We're going to talk about the birthday paradox. So if we have a group of n people, what are the odds of a shared birthday? So first we'll talk about what are the odds that somebody shares a birthday with you? Well, we're going to pretend that everybody has an equal chance of having a given birthday. There are 365 days in a year. So the probability that somebody shares a birthday with you is equal to 1 minus the probability that nobody shares a birthday with you. This is a common probability trick, is sometimes calculating the exact probability is too difficult. So instead, it's much easier to calculate the not and take 1 minus the not, and that will give you the probability. In this case, it needs person 1 needs to not have your birthday, and person 2 needs to not have your birthday, and person 3 needs to not have your birthday, and so on and so on and so on. So there's a 364 out of 365 chance that person B doesn't have that person A doesn't have your birthday, a 364 over 365 chance that person B doesn't have your birthday, and so on and so on, which is 1 minus 364 over 365 to the n is the fast way of writing that. So now, instead of talking about sharing a birthday with you, if we have a group of people, what are the odds that there is a shared birthday between any 2 people? And there are 365 potential birthdays, and each time you are eliminating 1 birthday from the space of possible birthdays that are possible without there being an overlap. And the math, if you do it out, looks like this. I'm not going to do it because we have a limited amount of time. And if you graph these, you'll see that when you are comparing pairs of birthdays versus anybody sharing a birthday with you, the pairs of birthdays grow insanely rapidly, such that by the time you have about 60 people, the odds of there being at least 1 shared birthday in the group of people is almost 1. Whereas if you're looking for people to share a birthday with you at 60, it's less than a 20% chance that somebody will share a birthday with you. So when you're dealing with pairs of things, when you're looking at pairs of objects or possible pairings of objects, these can grow, the odds of encountering these pairings can grow very, 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 very rapidly. So you can have the odds of an individual thing happening be low, but the odds of a pair of things happening be very high in an interesting way. So this is a good trick. Tuck this in your back pocket. So I kind of talked about something without actually talking about that, and that is distribution. So a distribution is a way of describing the odds of something happening. So in this case, let's talk first about rolling a six-sided dice. If we roll a six-sided dice, there's an equal chance of it being a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. In this case, I did it on the computer. I'm not actually rolling this dice because that's too many rolls. But here I rolled a dice on the computer 100,000 times and I graphed the results. And you can see the results are this nice flat distribution. Then if we're going to flip a coin, we have a similar, we're going to flip 7 coins and we're going to count the heads as 1. You can see that flipping these 7 coins, the average number is the same as rolling a 1d6. It's about 3.5. But the experience distribution is very different. Rolling a 1d6, you have an equal chance of getting a 1 as you do of getting a 6. Here, you have a much smaller chance of getting 6 on 6 heads on coins than you do of rolling a 6, substantially lower. And you have a chance of getting 7 heads or no heads, which is something that you cannot possibly have on a 1d6. You can't possibly roll a 0 or a 7. So even though these two distributions have the same mean, they have very different experiences. This binomial, where you're flipping a coin 7 times, or in dice land, if you're thinking about dice, if you're rolling 7 dice and you want to get 4 plus, right? This is going to be much more centralized of a distribution than the simply rolling a 1d6. And if we extend this out, we get what's called the normal distribution. The normal distribution is also sometimes called the bell curve or the Gaussian. The idea here is that as we add more and more trials and we are smoothing things, we're going to end up with something that's going to approach more and more this theoretical bell curve. And this is going to show up a lot in a lot of different contexts. And you can see that when we move from rolling a 1d6 to rolling to flipping 7 coins, that the distribution is starting to resemble more and more the bell curve. And in fact, we can extend this with a concept called the central limit theorem. And the basic idea behind the central limit theorem is that the more that you're summing or averaging, the more normal things start to look. Where normal in this case, not normal like that, but normal like that normal distribution. So I rolled a whole bunch of dice on my computer, a whole bunch of 6-sided dice on my computer, and I averaged them. And if we roll 1 dice, you can see we have this nice flat distribution. But as I roll more and more and more and more dice, the odds of us getting, we start to get a distribution that is looking much more like that normal distribution, that bell curve. And so when you have random events in your game, the more random events that you have in your game, paradoxically, it tends to make the game less random. If you're rolling a single dice, that outcome has a very wide distribution. It's very wide and very flat. Almost anything can happen. But if you're rolling like dozens or hundreds of dice, if you're flipping, dozens or hundreds of cards, the closer you are going to approach this Gaussian distribution and the more sort of normal an experience somebody's going to have. So if you want to add a little bit more variance into your game, one of the ways that you can do this paradoxically is by taking out random events, so that each individual random event has more of an impact. So we talked about normal distributions. The next distribution that we're going to talk about is called the hypergeometric distribution. And this comes up an enormous amount. For people who play competitive card games, this you see all the time. The idea is that if we have a deck of cards or a bag of tokens, and we're going to draw cards out of the deck or we're going to draw tokens out of the bag without replacing them. So once you get a card, it doesn't go back in the deck. And we can define a hypergeometric distribution where we say we have an n card deck. K is the number of hits. This is big K is the number of hits in the deck. Little n is the number of draws that we're taking. And little k is the number of hits that we're looking for in a particular draw. We can say the probability of getting exactly little k hits is big K choose little k times big N minus big K choose little n minus little k divided by big N divided by little n. If we have to graph it, this is what it looks like. So this is the probability, if we're using a standard 52 card deck, what is the probability that you have exactly a certain number of hearts in your hand? You can see that the probability peaks at 2. And that makes sense. If you've got an 8 card hand, about 1/4 of the cards are going to end up being one suit. But you can see that this hypergeometric distribution has a very fat tail where there's a lot of probability in the wings. It's not like that tight normal distribution. So you can see that there's about a 10% chance that you're going to get 0 hearts. And there is a non-zero, like a statistically measurable chance that you're going to get like 5 or even maybe 6 hearts in a hand, which is kind of wild, but it's something that you really need to be aware of. This is, you can see as you extend the hypergeometric distribution, it looks more normal, but it never quite gets to pure normality. The tails on the hypergeometric are always fat, and so you need to keep that in mind when you're designing card games or token drawing games. So I'm having fun. I hope you are all having fun. So let's have some more fun with hypergeometrics. So what I'm doing with this graph is that I'm changing the number of hits in the deck. So we have a 60 card deck, and then I'm changing the number of possible hits. And then this y-axis is the probability that I have at least one hit out of 8 cards. And you can see that very small changes in the number of hits cause very big increases in the likelihood of drawing. When I go from like 2 to 5 hits in a 60 card deck, I'm going from like a 25 to 30% chance to nearly a 60% chance. But you can also see that as I add more and more hits, my odds don't go to 1. When I double it again, I go from 5 to 10, I'm only going up to about like 0.75-ish. And so when you have a small number of hits, small changes have a big impact. But at the same time, when you have a lot of hits, each individual hit that you add is having less and less of an impact on the odds of drawing a particular set of hits. I'm now taking this from a reverse perspective. So this reverse perspective is, instead of fixing the size of the deck and changing the number of hits, what I'm doing now is I'm fixing the proportion of hits in the deck, and I'm changing the size of the overall deck. So for example, at 1, we have a 10 card deck with 1 hit. At 2, we have a 20 card deck with 2 hits. At 3, we have a 30 card deck with 3 hits. And you can see that as I make the deck bigger and bigger and bigger, even as I keep the proportion of hits the same, the odds that a player is going to draw a hit drops dramatically. So if you are making a game where you need players to have a high odds of having a particular card from a deck in order for the game to function well, you need to make sure that your decks are very small, or that your proportions are very high. Because once you start getting to like a 60 card deck, even if 10% of your deck is hits, you're still going to miss more, about half the time, slightly less than half the time. And an important function of this is that this keeps dropping. So even if you're keeping the proportion the same, as you increase your deck size, you have to increase the proportion of the card that you need in order to maintain the same odds of drawing that card. The last major thing that I'm going to talk about is the idea of the mathematics of weighting, also called the mathematics of growth. So we got the blob here. The blob just grows and grows and grows, but there's a lot of ways to talk about growing. Common kind of growing is a linear growth. So if you imagine that like each turn you get 3 carrots, I don't know, carrots is a resource. Each turn you get 3 carrots. That's a linearly growing amount of carrots. On turn 1 you have 3 carrots. On turn 2 you have 6 carrots. On turn 3 you have 9 carrots, and so on. Whereas with exponential growth, for each of your carrots you get more carrots. So like on turn 1 you might have 1 carrot. On turn 2, for each of your carrots you get twice as many carrots. So now you have 2 carrots. On turn 3, for each of your carrots, you now have 2 carrots. So now you have 4 carrots. And you might say, boy, that doesn't seem, I would rather have that linear growth, please. And thank you. But the way that linear and exponential growth work are that exponential growth grows exponentially. And so when you are designing a game, you need to be very careful about including these kinds of exponential feedback loops in your game, because they will absolutely just take over the game and make the whole game about that exponential feedback loop. So if you have a game where you get resources and then you can use your resources to buy more resources, that's going to tend to follow that exponential curve. And you need to be very aware of that. And a common design idea is that when you have these kinds of games, you need to make sure that the game ends at about the time that the linear curve and the exponential curve cross each other, because otherwise taking that exponential approach is just so much stronger than the linear approach that there's no comparison. So be aware of it. This is another, this idea also applies to the game trees. If we go back to the idea of a game tree, if for each of your pieces you can take a move each turn, if the number of pieces you have is growing turn over turn over turn, then the number of moves that you are making is going to grow exponentially. And so is the time to take your turn. So if you have games where you're acquiring more and more pieces, and each of those pieces can make its own move, maybe don't. Maybe be aware of this and think about how you can keep a nice clean bound on the number of actions that people can take, such that turns aren't kind of blowing up out of proportion. You want to try and put limits on that. So that's a common feature that you'll see in a lot of games is action points or some other kind of a limitation, so that even though the number of pieces that you have might be growing, the number of moves that you can take is still remaining bound and linear. But there is a third option. So I talked about linear and I talked about exponential growth. The next thing I'm going to talk about is hyperbolic growth. And this is, we're moving out of the realm of pure mathematics and into the realm of people's experiences. And the question is, how do people experience waiting for things? What does it feel like to wait for things? And what we see is that people have very time inconsistent preferences. Another way of saying that is that if you ask somebody, how long would you have to wait for $5 versus how long would you have to wait for $10? People, it's not just like a simple compounding model. It's not just a simple linear model, but people really hate waiting. The experience of waiting for $5, I'm not willing to wait very long for $5. The amount that you would have to pay me to wait for some amount of time goes up very, very radically. And this should carry over into your game design. People don't like waiting for things. If you're going to make people wait for things, you need to, even though mathematically the rewards might be linear or the rewards might be exponential, the experience of waiting means that people need to get paid off a lot in order to perceive that experience of waiting as being worth it. And so when you have situations where you take an action this turn and then it pays off next turn, that payoff needs to be really big in order for people to feel like they're having a good time, that they're having a good exchange. So I think that the bard Tom Petty said it best, that the waiting is the hardest part. The last thing that I'm going to talk about, this is not a mathematical topic, but these are modeling tools that you can use. So I've talked a lot about like possible approaches that you can take, things that you can do. These are tools that you might be able to make use of in your game designs. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is linear regression. I do a lot of linear regressions. I think that linear regressions are great. So this is an example of a linear regression that I did where I was trying to predict for a given cost how much power does a card have, where I measure power in some kind of mathematized way. The Arc Nova developer diary, they talked about explicitly doing this. This is something you can do in Excel. This is something you can do in almost any tool. I did this in Python, but you can use whatever tooling you want. And generally the point is not to make all the points fall along the line. It's not to make everything like a nice simple linear model, because you want your decisions to have grit. You want to be chew in your decisions. And so as a result, you really want to encourage people not to make one choice basically just as good as any other choice. Instead, what you want to do is you want to have some deviations from that pure line, but you need to make sure that the deviations are constrained. And if you're finding points that are well above the curve or well below the curve, you need to have an explanation for why, and you need to have an understanding for what's going on, and make sure that the player is getting rewarded for that, even though it's not falling on that line as well. Another approach is a Monte Carlo approach. So a lot of times calculating probability explicitly or analytically is the mathematized term for that, is hard. So an example of this is mulligans, right? So if you have your game where players draw an opening hand and then they're taking a mulligan, trying to calculate the exact odds of them having some kind of a card in their hand, especially if you have like a very complex mulliganing system, it gets really unfeasible to try and like write out all the terms and calculate it. Another example of this is weird card configurations. Like, what are the odds of you having like 2 cards of a certain type, and those types vary depending on what the other kinds are? It's too hard to just write all that down. Just simulate it. You just write a very simple program. There's an example here that I've given for calculating pi, the ratio of a circumference of a circle to its diameter, using this Monte Carlo approach, where essentially you just run the event over and over and over on the computer, and then you calculate the number of times the event occurs, and you divide it by the total number of times, and that gives you your probability. And that can be a really helpful tool when you're dealing with all kinds of probability that are hard to calculate straight up. So what have we learned? Math lets you prototype faster. Yay! We've learned some basic stuff about game theory. We've learned about payoff matrices. We've learned about game trees. We've learned about Nash equilibria. We've learned some stuff about combinatorics. We've learned about the factorial function, and we've learned about the birthday paradox. We've learned about distributions in the central limit theorem. We've learned that the more randomness that you add into your game, the less random the experience of the players is going to be to a certain extent. At the same time, though, there is a need to understand distributions, that people don't live in the average of your distributions. You can have two distributions with very similar averages, but very different tail experiences. And as a result, players will have very different experiences, and you need to make sure that there is fun in all of the parts of your distribution. You can weight that by the likelihood of getting there, but if you have an outcome that's based on rolling a d6, you need to make sure that all the possible outcomes are fun. Whereas if you have flipping a coin, you can weight those tails a lot less. With combinatorics, we also learned about the Shapley-Shubik power index. We learned that secretly 2 is not twice as much as 1, in particular when you're trying to get across a particular threshold. We learned about hypergeometric distributions and how these can have really big impacts on card distributions, the odds of a card ending up in your deck. And we've learned how to use these tools to try and make sure that players are going to end up with the right number of cards at the right time so that they get to have a good experience. We've learned about growth functions, and we've learned about hyperbolic time discounting. We've learned that weighting is really hard for a lot of players, and so you want to make sure that the payouts that people are getting are sufficiently large to justify that weighting, even if economically they might not be quite as the weighting might not be quite as costly as the players perceive it. And finally, we've learned about some techniques that players can use, like linear regression and Monte Carlo. And these techniques are not just from a player side, they're also from a designer side for you to try and use to make sure that your game is as good going into a playtest as possible, such that you have fewer unproductive playtests, your game goes on to great success, and that everybody gets signed or self-publishes or makes whatever games they want to, and they're all good. That's me. You can see my details over here. I got a GitHub where I have some of the math that I do for recreationally. I've got a YouTube channel where I do the podcast that I mentioned. I've got my email, my Blue Sky, and my website with the games that I'm working on right now.
Yes.
And
Recreational math, like we all do.
Recreational math, yeah.
I'm just going to I have a couple questions and comments.
Sure.
But I'm gonna do a quick pause just so we can. Okay, so that is just some of the stuff.
I know it's a lot.
It's a lot,
Yeah,
but there's
lot.
and
Yeah.
as they're going, I was like, I wanted to be typing, but I also wanted to be paying attention because there's so many things there that are either A, applicable to games I'm working on, or B, just make my brain hurt. Like so often when I'm, just trying to figure out how many of X things should be in my game, I'm like, well,
Yeah.
there's one of them and the deck is 6. So it's a 1/6. And if I just
obviously
multiply that by 10, it's still a 6th. A 6th of the cards are the card that we want.
That was explicitly the reason why I had that slide in there.
Right.
Yes,
And it's so simple.
yeah,
It's easy
so
peasy.
simple, but it's wrong. Yeah.
And it's literally just wrong. I have to do different math for my game.
I'm sorry. There's hypergeometric. There are online hypergeometric calculators.
Yeah. And it's weird. Math is freaking weird.
Math is weird. Yeah.
That's
the hell of it.
The other interesting thing, which is maybe only moderately useful for us as board game designers, but interesting as just designers in general. There's a guy I follow online who's a ad guy. He's in charge of ad campaigns, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And he tells this great story how this skyscraper kept getting complaints that their elevator was too slow. They contacted the elevator company. They were like, we need to replace this elevator. People are complaining, blah, 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 blah. They came back. Oh, it's going to be $5 million. It's a huge, huge project. It's in the butt. You're going to shut down, blah. And they talked to an ad guy, and he was like, just put mirrors there.
Yeah. Give them
It's
something to look at. Yeah,
it,
yeah,
it's not about the actual amount of time. It's that people are bored. So
yes,
so time is relative. Is a really
yes,
important concept to kind of keep in mind while you're designing,
yeah,
because if you have, people holding, this is why I always prefer people to draw cards at the end of their turn,
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
then they can spend everyone else's turn looking at theirs and going, okay, what am I going to
yes,
do? Okay, I can do that. What if they do that? Oh, it looks like they are doing this. So actually, I can't do. I have the little
yeah.
spreadsheet in my
No,
head.
it's a
Um,
huge. It's this is a like we're talking about technology. Like this is a technology in games that I think ought to be adopted universally. Always draw at the end of your turn,
right, and
like
then
with
it's
very rare
it's
exceptions.
so
Yeah,
annoying when I do play a game where
yeah.
it's like, okay, you start your turn by drawing a card. I'm like, game is
Come
not
on,
well
buddy.
designed. I
Yeah,
just know it's like the canary in the coal mine of like, oh, there's
right.
going to be problems in this
It's
game. Like,
Yeah. In programming, there's an idea called code smells,
Mhm.
which it's not that something is wrong, but if you see this kind of a thing, it's a sign that there's probably gonna be bad things somewhere else.
Right. If
So you
problem
might say that
A, then you're
yes,
probably gonna find B and C and D.
right. And A might not even be a problem. Like it's not necessarily the worst that you draw a card at the start of your turn, but unless the person designing the game has a reason for you to draw the card at your start
Right.
of your turn,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And that actually,
Yeah.
honestly, that is a really big point too, which is
Mhm.
and somewhat tangential to what we're talking about. But it's okay to do dumb things in your game as long as there's
Yes.
a reason that you're doing it, and the reason is a good, like, oh, I
Yes.
did 20 tests, and even though this feels or looks or whatever stupid, it actually does work out better over the long run, because I've shown that people think that it's actually really
Right.
it came up weirdly. I've done a bunch of design,
Mhm.
and one of the maps that I designed had two clearings at the very bottom of the map that were connected by a really long path, which none of the
Mhm.
official maps do. None of the other fan
Right.
maps
It's
do.
not obvious. Yeah, 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 yeah.
But
Right, yeah.
but it was necessary for the concept that I was working on to work. And every single time I tested it with people, one person would always be like, "That's weird." At the very start, they'd be like,
Yeah,
"Why are these? This is a connection? That's dumb. I don't like that."
yeah.
And I would say 95% of the time, that person by the end of the game went, "This is really interesting. I really like this."
Mhm.
And I was like, "I know."
Yeah,
It's like, I know it's a dumb thing, but I did it. There was a reason for it. I did it on purpose, and
right.
that it worked. And
Yeah.
that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's not actually tangential. It's kind of central to the idea here is that the point of mathematics for game design, this is not telling you what to do. This is giving you tools to figure out what you're doing better and to like illuminate the choices that you're making, because a
Mhm.
lot of times it's easy to make a particular choice without thinking about it, but when you have these kind of mathematized approaches, it helps you to figure things out without you having to do that testing.
Right, right. And I
Like,
mean,
yeah,
even to just bring it into the daylight of
right,
or to more relatable terms, I'm dealing with dungeons right now, and we've taken the deck
right.
and given kind of rarities.
Yeah.
But in doing that, we went from having, four types of cards to six types of cards. But now, because of
Mhm.
kind of the curve of it, there's still 40 of each type of card, the actual number
Right.
of cards. But one of the things that I'm trying to do is, as we talked about in the interview,
Mhm.
lower the number of cards in total in the game just to lower cost, as there's so
Yes.
many different
Yeah.
piles on the. Oh, if I two from all of the piles, that's actually 12 less cards. That's half of a sheet. That's, it's like the whole
Yeah.
thing. So I'm like, okay, what does it look like if instead of, this distribution, it's the same relative one, but the decks are smaller? Things get a little
Mhm.
more random, but actually more consistent this way and less consistent
Yeah.
that way.
Yep.
And it ties directly to that. I'm
Yeah.
excited to go and start actually like plugging some stuff in. Um, one of the things that I've been using a lot in the space game is
Mhm.
any dice. Is
Yes. Any
very
dice
good.
is great. Yes.
It's very hard to actually get the syntax exactly right. It really
Yep.
brings into the very start of it, answers very specific questions very specifically. And very
Yes.
often it's just like, yeah, that's 6. And you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense at all. And you're like,
No, yeah.
I was asking totally the wrong question. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
6. If I ask that
Yep.
question, the answer is 6.
Yep.
But there are also, I have found lots and lots of people online who are much more skilled with it, and they are very
Yeah.
friendly. And usually, if you go asking for help with any dice, someone will, oh, just put in this formula. And you're like,
Absolutely.
oh, great.
Yeah.
Then it's just saving that formula on a sticky note off on the side of your computer, going, if I ever want to calculate this again, I have to remember this because I'm never ever going to remember.
No.
But it is great for just going, okay, because the problem I had was a long time ago in that, where I was like, okay, if I have a fleet that's uh, 2d10s and 1d8 and 3d6s up against a fleet that's 1d4 and 2d8s and all of
Yeah.
this, what is the chance that this fleet will win versus this fleet?
Hmm.
And I was like, I literally, somebody can do it. And somebody came
Yes.
back and was like, oh yeah, just put this in.
Yep. Yep.
So great. I love this.
Yep.
Um, There was something else, but I can't. You made too many good points.
Aw.
Something about the size of decks and how that
Yes.
messes things up.
Yes. I mean, I think that one of the things you should keep in mind is if your deck requires stuff in order to function, you need to have a really robust mulliganing rule, or you
Right.
need to just start the players off with the cards. Because in order to make sure that everybody starts off, I'm going to turn to Magic the Gathering like with lands, with the way that the land system works, you are devoting a third of your deck to lands approximately,
Mm.
and you have a mulligan system. And even then, like maybe 5% of games are non-games. And that's yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and if you talk to Mark Rosewater, the lead designer of
yep.
Magic the Gathering, he'll actually
That's intentional, right,
he'll
yeah,
say,
yeah,
yeah, that's actually a good thing. And
absolutely.
we have very intentionally. I mean, there are so many trading card games
Yes.
with many different designs. Many of them try to quote unquote fix Magic the Gathering's mana system,
Madness system, yep,
fistum, and and invariably, 95% of them fail because
yeah,
there is something to a little bit of randomness being good, and just going, you know
yes,
what? Yeah, that I failed. That sometimes you just
yep.
lose to the deck, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a big reason for Magic's continued popularity is that in general, when you are talking about games in which the better player always wins are not good games from a like growth standpoint. Because if you think about like chess or fighting games or other games where there's like very clear the better player almost always wins, the ability to get new players coming in is a lot lower because the skill of the population is so high that a new person coming in is just gonna have a bad time, right?
Right, right. It's like
The yeah, the,
I laugh here because my brother is a huge chess nerd. Just like,
yeah,
very good, been playing for
yeah,
years and years and years, plays with his friends all the time.
yeah,
And just like for funsies, the last time we were hanging out, we were getting ready for dinner and people were cooking
yeah.
and we're just hanging out and chit chat. Oh, let's just like play a game of chess while
Let's
we're
play a
chit.
game of chess. Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I do not like
yeah.
I like know how, but I don't
Mhm.
know how.
You don't do it. Yeah, yeah. Right.
And
Like there's
and
levels to
and
this.
right,
Yeah,
and like the
yeah,
first like 6 turns or so, he was like, "Hey, you're actually doing pretty good. This is you're making good decisions, blah blah blah." And then like 2 turns later, he was like, "Okay, so you accidentally moved this to this point," and so I just and it
yeah.
was like,
You lose. Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
fun."
yeah. Yeah, no, and like the experience of getting into chess or getting into fighting games is assuming that you're like jumping into the deep end of like the player pool and you don't have like a cohort of people that you're learning and playing with is just you go in and you get obliterated, right?
Right.
And like the mana system and other in general in games you do not want the better player to always win if you are trying to make a game that has like the ability to grow and be like a long-term competitive game.
Yeah, and
And that
actually
might not yeah.
right, and that actually brings me back to was, which is
Mhm.
that the kind of paradoxically sometimes adding more randomness
Yes.
which is just a weird thing to try to wrap my head around. And I'm just even trying to figure out how that applies to multiple different designs that I'm working on right now, being like,
Yeah.
what does
So
that
so a big caveat,
mean?
yeah. So a big caveat about that analysis is I'm assuming that like you're doing it all at once, right? So if you are like, let's imagine that you're playing a game where after every move you're rolling a dice and that move may or may not happen. Let's call it like dice chess, right? Where you make a move and then you roll a dice and on a certain number, then you do or don't make the move. Because there's this sequence of moves, adding that variance in the game just does make it more random in a way that's not fun or interesting,
Right,
because like the consequence of one move carries over in such a strong way in chess onto the future of the game.
right,
But if we're talking about like, okay, my unit is attacking your unit, it is better if you want a more standardized result, it is better to roll a big bucket of dice
right,
just uniformly. And similarly, like if you're having a game like a deck builder, more times you go through your deck, the less the impact of each individual deck cycle is going to be. If you're only going through your deck like 2 or 3 times, whether and we're talking about like a quintessential deck builder where like
right,
the cards go into your discard pile and then you have a chance to draw them, whether you draw the cards on like on the first turn of your first reshuffle or the second turn of your first reshuffle has a huge impact. Whereas, like, if you're just
right.
constantly shuffling your deck and
And then
yeah,
towards the end of the
yeah,
game, you're like, well, there's no reason for me to be buying any more cards because
right,
I'm gonna shuffle one more time, and so it's probably not
right,
gonna hard so hard. And
hmm
it's just,
right,
which is one of the
yeah,
reasons, whole thing, every
yeah,
single time, shuffle it all together. We're gonna
yeah.
make these cards matter.
And I think that's a piece of advice to keep in mind for deck builder and just in general. Whenever you're adding a random element, if you're adding a random element, it is better to kind of lean into the random element to a certain extent and not just like have, okay, now we draw an event card. Like
Right,
this is me. This is me. If your game has an event card, it could be a perfectly great game, a perfectly wonderful game. I like whenever you have to draw an event card and then that changes the way that the game has as a way of introducing replayability. I hate that because you have like a one-off random event that you have like no control or mitigation about other than just like knowing what's in the deck.
right, right.
Right.
Yeah, I'm actually
Yeah.
dealing with that exact thing right now. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. So my advice is don't do that,
Well,
right? Like if you're gonna
it's funny that
or
you're
do it,
saying
yeah.
that because
Yeah.
I had a playtester be like, "Well, what if you just added event cards?" And I was like, "Oh, I can add event cards. I don't care. Sure."
Everybody wants to add
And
event
I
cards. Don't
added
do it.
event
Don't
cards
do
and
it.
did one test, and the person who was playing was like, "You need
Yeah. Don't
these are
I mean,
horrible." And I was like, "Okay, okay, I'll take them out. It's
yeah.
fine."
Yeah, no, no, no. But it's like a really easy thing. It's a really easy idea. Like, let's add a little bit of variance, right?
Right,
But in order to add a little bit of variance, you actually need to add a lot of variance. Because if you add a little bit of variance, you get a lot more variance than you think. And if you add a lot of variance, you get if you get a lot of
more
repeats of the
consistent
same kind
randomness
of
as
variance, you get less variance than you think.
right, right.
Right.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Now and it's just me trying to figure out
Yeah.
how do I apply this? I know there's a way.
Right.
It's asking
It's
always.
asking the right questions. Yeah. And using technology, right? Like I think that one of the ways that you can mitigate against that is that you can like with an event card, if you can show people what the next event card is going to be, that helps to mitigate things a lot, right? Like if
Right.
you play with the top of the deck revealed, that is a way to implement event cards in a way that doesn't feel like
Right.
hideously
And
punishing.
then you're
Or
going,
yeah,
okay, do I want to put the event here or put it here?
right, right.
Or like I don't know if you have watched and played Blueprints, the new hot streamer
Yes,
game,
yes. I
where
have watched people play
you get to
blueprints.
see
Yeah,
three, and
yeah,
you get to choose which of the
yeah.
three. So you're
Yes.
not just random every time. You're like,
Yeah. I mean,
what
it
am I
is
doing?
random, but right, like you have some control over that variance. And a game that I think that a lot of people haven't played but does this kind of variance pretty well
Mhm.
is Versailles 1917, which is a GMT game about negotiating the end of the First World War. And there are these event cards, but the event card is public information, and one of the things you can do like as a result of doing a thing is that you can also take the event card. And so because of that, you everybody is aware of what's going to happen. And so like these little spurts of variance, you feel like you can control them as opposed to they're just like,
Right, and you
well,
can
guess I get hosed.
right, and you can
Right. Yeah.
leverage them ahead of time,
Right.
knowing, "Oh,
Yes.
okay, there is a this percent chance that I'm going to get," as opposed
Yeah.
to turn starts and at the start of your turn, horrible,
Yeah.
and
You get hosed. Well,
right.
gee, guess I just die then.
Well, I guess there's
Um,
an asteroid field in my way.
yeah.
Shit. Right. Which is,
Another game that yeah, another game that does events really well is Through the Ages,
hmm?
where there's like a deck of events. On your turn, you draw events, and then you can choose to seed events into the deck, into like the next deck. And whenever you seed an event into the next deck, an event from the current deck happens.
Mhm.
Um, and so with that setup, you get to control the events that are ending up in the deck for next, like for the next cycle through. And it
Right.
also lets people have some control over the amount of variance. Like if you are behind, maybe you want to inject more variance, so you want to be always seeding events to happen. Whereas if you're ahead, maybe you don't want to flip. You don't want to seed an event. Right. Yeah.
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 Um, well, I could talk about math, how it applies. You can go and
Adios.
have dinner, and I'm gonna go
Yes.
because we're on the different opposite sides of the country. But I
Yes.
very much look forward to playing your game again and having you play mine again, and to be like,
Thank you
yes,
very
there we
much.
go. With that, Ed linked all of the stuff earlier or at the end of the talk. You can go and check. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and there you can talk to Ned. There, we're
It's a good time.
board game design, and I always forget. So I get too caught up in talking with people, and I'm like, how do I end this? Usually, I have a thing that I say every. Anyway, till next time.
Bye bye.